Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Enrichment Series webinar. I am your host, Amir Ganad, and I'm here with our guest speaker, Jim Stengel. Jim is the former CMO of Procter & Gamble. In 2008, in October 2008, in fact, Jim Stengel shocked the marketing world by leaving his prestigious role as Global Marketing Officer at Procter & Gamble, one of the most admired brand building companies in the world. This bold move was Jim's first step on a new mission to share his passion for growing business through a focus on higher ideals. To continue on his mission, Jim has embraced a variety of exciting roles. He is the president and CEO of the Jim Stengel Company, host of the CMO Podcast, which he's going to talk to us about today, author of Grow, How Ideals Power Growth and Profit at the World's Greatest Companies, and Unleashing the Innovators, How Mature Companies Find New Life and with Startups. Jim is also adjunct professor at Kellogg Northwestern. He's a speaker with the Washington Speakers Bureau and advisor to several companies. We are grateful to have you, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn it over to you so you can share your wisdom with us.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good to be with you. Thank you, Amir, for that gracious introduction. I just want to say thank you for joining us. Glad that there are some people from Europe, Latin America, North America. It's always good to be with ex-P&Gers. And I wanted to start by just saying I hope you are all healthy, happy, productive, and focused in the areas that are important for you. I think that it's never been more important than now, of course, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. I'm coming to you this morning from my Cincinnati office. I'm the only one in here. It's a beautiful sunny morning in the autumn, blue sky, sunshine, and just a gorgeous day. And you know, when Amir and the team asked me to be with you this morning, or whatever part of the day it is for you, I thought about what I could offer that is unique and special and relevant and current. And so I thought I would harvest the learning from this podcast that I began last May. And since I began the podcast, I've talked to about 110 leaders. And of course, when March and April hit, those discussions sort of changed. So I'm going to talk today about what I've learned about leadership in these unique times from some of the most remarkable companies and leaders in the world. And I'll get into that in a little bit more depth in a moment. But the first thing I would say is here's another P&Ger, Alex Tosilini. I think he's on the webinar, but I'm starting with this just to say how important I think it is that we all stay in touch during these times, and how important it is that we do something that makes us happy. You know, physical health and mental health are everything right now. And both Alex and I are trying to get outside more with our families, with each other, and be healthy, get fresh air, get some exercise, change our pace. So I hope you're also finding strategies to keep yourself sort of mentally, socially, physically, spiritually healthy. So, I'm going to shift a little bit now into the content of this morning. And before doing that, we'll do a little bit of background and a little bit of warm up before we get into the lessons. And I've asked Amir if we can have some dialogue toward the end of this, if we can unmute. We'll see how that works. That typically isn't done on these webinars, but we're going to give it a shot toward the end to see if we can share some of our own thoughts. You know, at P&G, we always started with our, you know, if you worked on a brand, whatever function you were in, we sort of had our brand frameworks, and we had reviews, of course, and we always asked who, what, and how. But before that, with CMK's help, we always did a landscape assessment. What's going on around us that's relevant for our business and our brands? And I want to share this, these conclusions, I would say, from a professor, a Portuguese professor at the Northwestern School, Sergio Rebelo. He's the most remarkable economist. He's in the finance department at Northwestern. And I was with him last week at a summit, a marketing leadership summit at the Kellogg School. Of course, it was virtual. And we do this once a year, invitation only. We had about 200 leaders from around the world. And Sergio kicked it off with a presentation of what, and he's a data geek, and he's a super smart guy, but he shared what are the lasting changes from what we're going through. What is going to be with us as we come out of this pandemic someday? And these aren't going to shock you. Some of them are blindingly obvious, but some of them are a little bit more nuanced. And he raised 8 points. And the first one is that, you know, this idea of screening for viruses, screening for whether or not you're healthy, using biometrics. He said, much like the 9/11 terrorist attack in the US that affected security around the world, he said, we're going to have a similar reaction to the pandemic. So we're just going to get used to screening much more in our daily life than we ever have before. So of course, the rise of biometrics and the rise of quick analytical tools will be obviously some new business opportunities. The second one, of course, we're all doing this. I'm in this office today alone. We're doing remote work. That will not go away when we come out of this. Microsoft was kind of the latest company to say that they see a permanent change in how they work and where they work. This will have a massive impact on commercial real estate, of course, but this is one that is one of those obvious ones that we're all living through. E-commerce, of course, every leader I've talked to since this began has massively accelerated their e-commerce capability. And those that were not prepared, it just shined an awful spotlight on the lack of capability to respond to consumers. So we're going to continue to see investment there. We're going to continue to see those who do it well excel. And this will obviously have a negative impact on bricks and mortar and that element of commercial real estate. Telemedicine is the fourth one. This was already a trend. Lots of very, very interesting startups in this space. This will only continue, only accelerate. I think it's going to change the nature of primary care. Was it a trend before? Of course, but it's only simply accelerated. And the next one, you may love this or not love it, bigger role of government in the economy. It's already here in all societies going through this pandemic. Stimulus money, more social nets, government as a lender, government as an insurer. This is not going away. Democracies are going to be more socialized than ever in Sergio's point of view as he looks at the data. The next one is reshoring, he calls it. The global supply chains are being questioned. Companies are looking for plan B, how to source things closer to home within their national borders. And of course, if they're bringing supply chains closer to their home markets or closer to the markets in which they are based, that isn't necessarily going to bring back jobs because things are being automated at a remarkable speed. But supply chains are obviously being thought through very, very carefully. Higher income inequality, it's a reality. We're seeing it through the pandemic, sadly. That's only going to continue. And the last one, a larger role for Asia in the world economy. And he shared a lot of data to show how many Asian countries responded to the pandemic in a better way than Western democracies. So these are the lasting changes. This is a landscape assessment for what we're about to talk about in terms of leadership lessons. And I'll move to this next slide, which is I think an interesting one for any of us that are involved in business and brand building. This is one of the slides from Sergio's presentation from last week. His point was, we remember very little in our lives. We remember about 0.05% of our life, which is really a pretty shocking number. And his point was, we remember throughout our lives the highs and the lows. That's what sticks with us. And his point was that in this time, which is obviously a difficult time for so many people in so many ways, the brands, the companies, the people who show up in the right way for these people, that will be remembered. So it's a time for us as leaders, for us as brand builders, for us as companies to be there for our people, our customers, and it will be remembered. So he sees this as a very, very interesting time to build equity, social capital, he calls it, with customers and employees. So that's the landscape assessment, a little bit of the backdrop before we jump into the lessons. As I mentioned up front, I'm harvesting these lessons from this enormous database, actually, that I've gathered. I began this podcast back in May of last year, so about 18 months ago. I do 1 or 2 a week, and I typically do about an hour interview with a senior leader about their business, their challenges, their career paths. And obviously those conversations changed when the pandemic hit last March, April. And what I started doing is going back to some of the people I'd interviewed for the first time to ask them how life has changed for them and their companies since the pandemic hit. So that's the database. Here are a few of the people I've talked to. As I said, we've done about 110 interviews. We've released about 101 of them. And so this is interesting data. It's current data. I hadn't really stepped back and looked at this from a macro perspective since we started. So this was a really nice opportunity for my team and I to delve into these transcripts and these interviews to see what was sort of most prominent and most interesting and most trending. But I think I had to start, when March and April hit with a pandemic. This is a quote from a Bob Dylan song, The Ballad of the Thin Man. I think this sort of summed up the emotion from most people, including probably most of you in this webinar. And it's like, oh my God, what is going on? I don't know what it is. Am I here all alone? There was, a feeling of, we haven't been here before. There's no precedent. Whatever's going on, we don't fully understand it. In some sense, we still don't. So this was it. There was this bewilderment and, in some sense, this apprehension that all of us were going through. So anyway, that kind of sums up the emotion of people. We're getting, I think, a little bit more accustomed to what we're going through. So people are, I think, are getting ahead of it a bit more. But that was the prevailing emotion. And I want to, if we were together in a big room, we'd probably stop right now and talk about this for a moment. But I'd like you to think about this question about how have you as an individual, a person, turned these headwinds, both professionally and personally, into some sort of tailwind in how you lead. And since this audience is ex-P&Gers, you're accustomed to looking at headwinds and figuring out how to make it a tailwind. That's just what we did and what we do. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about that deliberately, and maybe write a note right now, jot a thought, jot a new habit, a practice, something that's working for you in your professional life, with your teams, in your personal life. And we're going to come back to this question after we go through the learning from these podcasts. And if we can, maybe have a discussion about it. If you have some interesting thoughts, maybe put it into the chat function on our webinar, and Amir and Liz and myself will try to look at these things and maybe draw some conclusions at the end. So think about this question, maybe make some notes as we go through this learning from other leaders. So 5 fresh lessons in leadership. I think some of these are obviously not going to be a surprise to you. Some of them are extremely obvious. Doesn't mean they're any less important. We all know that, most of us know how to do leadership, how to lead teams, how to be productive, how to inspire people, how to set an agenda, make priorities. We don't always follow up on what we know. So while some of these are obvious, I think they've never been more important. And the first one is people are being dramatically more choiceful, more focused. I am hearing this in every single interview. And great leaders are always choiceful. We're at a different level during this pandemic. And there are these 3 brands on the screen. Bombas, which is a sock company, fast growing, fabulous products, for every one they sell, they give one away, much like the Tom Shoes model. And of course, Kroger and Levi's you're all familiar with. I was talking to Mandy Rassi on an interview. She is the Chief Brand Officer at Kroger. She is ex-P&G. And she talked about going through this pandemic and working with her team and being virtual and being obviously a company that was, crucial during this pandemic. She talked about how her mind is clearer. She is much more focused on exactly what has to happen for customers and teammates. All the other stuff that we got distracted by sort of went away. So she felt that she was just more essential, more focused, more inspired than ever because her mind was clearer. The woman who runs marketing at Levi's, and obviously their business, retail, apparel, took a major hit in the pandemic, but they've come through this, and obviously Levi's is their CEO is Chip Bergh, a friend of many of yours. Started at P&G the same year I did. Levi's, Jen has this concept of the power of quitting something and moving on. And she said, we've been trained that quitting means losing and that winners don't quit. But she said she's gotten more accustomed to quitting something that isn't working, quitting a habit, quitting a process much more quickly during this pandemic. And Bombas has spoken about their focus. As soon as this hit, everybody wanted them to help. Everyone needed things, but they really doubled down and used their filter of their purpose to focus much more on homeless shelters and ensuring that their product got to homeless shelters because that was where the greatest need was. The second sort of lesson from these interviews from this database, more purposeful, more useful. And you're probably going to say, this is Jim, he's going to talk about purpose. I have to say this concept of being more useful for people, I'm hearing it in the language of all kinds of companies and all kinds of brands. When this pandemic hit, people just said, what can we do as an organization, as a team, to be more helpful, to be more useful, to be of service to people? Some companies shifted products they were making. They deployed their resources in different ways, and there are countless stories of that. And many of you have been involved in that. And I just highlight two brands here. There are many, many more I could talk about. Nextdoor, which is a neighborhood app in about 260,000 communities around the world. It really is a platform for neighborhoods to share news, share ideas, tackle problems together. The leadership group at Nextdoor, including their CMO, Mariam Banakaram, said that, our platform was on hyperdrive during this time and still is, helping people shop, helping people get groceries together, minimizing shopping trips. When people got sick, helping them get help, helping people get to a hospital. So they said they really took their service of activating communities to a whole new level during this time and became even more purposeful, even more useful. USAA is a financial services company. It is founded in San Antonio, Texas. It serves the U.S. military and veterans, 13 million members. Their CMO is a guy named Tony Wells, also a veteran. He just speaks about how their purpose of helping military families with their confidence and financial well-being. He said, our 35,000 employees, everyone knows their role in bringing that purpose to life. And we just kind of accelerated our activities to bring the purpose to life during the pandemic. He speaks about all sorts of anecdotes and stories about people needing help, claims during disasters like hurricanes, floods, getting money to people in a day or two, helping people make the right financial decisions, presenting them with options, and just being 24/7 useful and purposeful for their customers. The slide I put in front of you is a busy slide. And the reason I'm sharing this is this is a slide from a screen grab from a company called Mehra, which is a real-time predictive analytics company that looks at brand equity activation, brand purpose activation, and looks for causalities with financial results. It's an exciting company. We at my company work with them. We're a partner with them. In fact, we've invested in them. But we have been using their database to look at what's happening with brands and brand purpose and brand equity during this pandemic. And to make sort of a lot of data simple, they look at 4,000 brands. They look at lots and lots of intelligence metrics. They're finding that the brands that have the strongest purpose ratings as seen by consumers are doing better significantly throughout this pandemic on their business metrics, their financial metrics. So just a little bit of quantitative perspective to the anecdotal perspective I am sharing from the podcast learning. The third lesson I would say, and I'm not sure we would have seen this a year or two ago, this feeling that brands are more activist, more bold, and I'm talking about almost every leader I talked to since the pandemic is speaking about this. And NASCAR, which, you know, those of you know the brand, you wouldn't have put it probably in the activist category a year or two ago. You know, the stance they have taken during Black Lives Matter, the stance they have taken about removing the Confederate flag from all of their venues and events, it was bold, was I think unexpected by many. Puma has a long history of standing up behind its athletes and what its athletes think, because back to the 1968 Olympics, when Tommy Smith raised his fist about racial inequality, they continue with that. They urge their consumers to share their voices, their ambassadors, they call them their ambassadors, they're the people they work with, do collaborations with. They're providing ways for discussions to happen on their platforms. And of course, P&G, which I think we're all following the stance they have taken on gender inequality, on racial inequality, and they're doing the things that we would expect P&G to do, but I think they're doing them with greater commitment and purpose. And I think what the entire team, David, Mark, and everyone is doing makes us all proud. More speed, more agility. You know, we can always have more of that, of course. Decision making and slowness has been an issue in almost every company any of us have worked in. This one theme I'm hearing from every discussion is how people are, of course, working virtually, but how they are pushing decision making down, operating with greater agility, greater creativity, greater speed. And IBM had started this journey well before the pandemic hit. They had moved their 4,000 marketing people to an agile way of working, and they embedded agile in everything they did. They got rid of the silos. They got rid of the subdivisions. They put everyone against the highest priorities. And the CMO's job, Michelle Peluso, is moving people to different teams, doing different sprints to help them achieve their objectives. ABInBev, Pedro Earp, who is the CMO and the head of innovation at ABInBev, spoke to me about how they could never imagine working the way they used to. He said the amount of creativity, innovation, ideas, and speed in making them happen has brought them great energy. And of course, their business went through a massive disruption. Some of it is surging, but of course, all the on-premise stuff came to a stop. So they had to think very creatively about how they are relevant for people today. And the last one, this, you know, it's an obvious one, I guess, but this idea of bringing more humanity and more vulnerability to each other, to our teams, to our customers, to our partners. Everyone has stories about this. And some people have revelations, but the two, MasterCard and Pepsi, I just have up here as an example. Both of the leaders at those companies that I talked to, Greg Lyons and Raja Rajamanar, just spoke about how they're making extra efforts to stay in touch with their people, with their cross-functional partners, in unexpected ways, and to be engaging with people on, just how are you kind of discussions, doing different ways to keep their teams together, keep a sense of humor, keep their wit, keep their energy up, keep their mental health intact. So I think this, obviously being a human-centric leader and a vulnerable leader has always been important. It just has never been more valuable and important than now. In fact, one leader said to me, this time is putting a real highlight on the leaders that have embraced the sense of humanity, vulnerability versus those that haven't. And employees are becoming much less tolerant of those that do not operate and manage this way. So these are the top lessons from the world's best marketing leaders as harvested from my 100 plus podcasts. And I would say these aren't shocking to you, I'm sure, but the level of passion and energy I'm hearing from these leaders in these areas is palpable, and actually makes me very optimistic about coming out of this pandemic with stronger organizations and I think stronger brands. So more choiceful, more focused, more purposeful, useful, more activist, more bold, higher speed, higher agility, and more humanity. And I wouldn't be a P&G person if I didn't try to think about this in terms of a conceptual framework, a construct, and I just share this this model. It's not fully baked. It's not pressure tested. I haven't been out there working with companies and teams on this, but as I looked at the data coming in from this podcast and tried to synthesize that as I was preparing for this, I just thought, what is going on here? Will some of these things outlast this pandemic, much like Sergio talked about telemedicine and automation and other areas. But those of us who were in the commercial function, and most of the people on this call have come out of commercial functions at P&G. We had our brand building frameworks, we had our who, what, how models. And I just want to maybe put some of this information into this construct. Pre-2020, obviously we thought about the customers who were most important for our future. We thought about our purpose as a brand or a company. We thought about what we offer to bring the purpose to life and how we delivered it. And so many of us were trained in this. Some on this call may have helped invent it, but this is sort of how P&G and many companies now think about their brands. And obviously, all of that is still relevant today. I think what's happened in this pandemic that we're going through, which is a massive disruption, something that none of us have ever experienced in our career, I think it is putting a highlight on some other things. So I think when we think about who our brand is most trying to delight or service, I think it's customers, of course, but it's also colleagues. It's also underrepresented people in our societies, and it's ourselves. So when we think about who are we focused on to build our business and build our brand, customers will always be important, but I think the circle is bigger. If we're not taking care of our colleagues, the underrepresented, and ourselves as leaders to keep ourselves fresh and energized, it's sort of all going to come down. So I think the who is getting bigger, and the focus that many leaders are having right now on colleagues is something that it's at a level I've never seen. And the second one, purpose. A great purpose is always category relevant. It makes sense with a brand's history. It makes sense with the customers. It makes sense for the employees. But I think those, purpose right now is a bigger, it's a bigger space. Of course, it's about the category, but it's also about social impact. It's about justice. It's about fairness. It's about the environment. And I think it's difficult to have a purpose for a brand right now that doesn't consider all elements of things that are important for our people, our customers, and society at large. We always talk to P&G about what we deliver. We often call them points of difference. How is our brand different? What's What do we invest in for competitive advantage? And that will continue, of course, but it's difficult to think about a business or brand right now that doesn't have health and safety as some part of what they're offering. And that's not going to go away, as Professor Robello talked about. And also accountability to do what we say we're going to do for people. And I talked about this BERA database a few slides ago. Another learning that's coming out of the BERA database is that those brands that are activating their purpose and doing it with competence, in other words, they really, really do what they say they're going to do. They deliver on their product and service benefits. Those are the ones that are popping out. So I think this sense of accountability, which has always been important, is more important than ever right now. And then how do we deliver our plans? We were famous at P&G and still looking at all the touch points that a customer has with us or a consumer has with us. Of course, that's still important, but how we deliver it with agile systems and a human centricity, which is more important than ever now during these times and coming out of them. So anyway, just a construct. Again, it's not fully baked, it's not pressure tested, but it made me think about how to put this learning to something that is more conceptual. So I want to turn to the question that we started this discussion with, and that is, how have you as leaders taken these headwinds and turned them into a tailwind for you and how you lead? I don't know if there's anything that we just talked about that spurred a thought or an affirmation or a focusing with you, but I thought what we could do, if it's possible, Amir, is open up the webinar for some discussion on this and to learn from each other, if it's possible, if we could unmute and have a discussion about what the ex-P&Gers on this webinar have learned that might help others.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jim. We do have a few comments in the chat box. I'm going to go over a couple of these while we try to figure out if we can, if folks can unmute themselves. So, and we can see if that can happen. I'm going to try to do it on my end, but as you mentioned before, we hadn't done this before, so we're going to see how it works out. And so, yeah, I see I can unmute you, and then you're going to have to self-unmute. But anyway, just one question, and you may be able to go through this very quickly, but we had a comment that said for folks who are not native English speakers, in case they're kind of hung up on these two terms that they may not be familiar with, headwind and tailwind. Could you just kind of very quickly demystify that for those who may not be familiar with the terms?
Yeah, sure. I apologize if I use some colloquialism or some odd terms. These come out of sailing, of sailboats and sailors. A headwind, of course, is wind coming in your face. Or if you're a cyclist or a runner, when there's wind coming at you, obviously much more difficult to move forward. Versus some wind behind you, a tailwind, which makes your boat go faster, makes your bicycle go faster, makes you run faster. So it's just a kind of a metaphor. A headwind is something that's hard to make progress against. A tailwind is an assist. It helps you. So the pandemic, of course, has been a headwind for so many businesses. Outlets have shut down, especially for hospitality, of course, and travel. But how can you turn this headwind into something that might help you be more focused, be more human, in terms of how you lead? I apologize if I use some special language, but that's what I meant.
That's good. Thank you so much. We had some comments that came in that, someone says, well, definitely more intentional. They're being intentional. They're focused on how to be most useful to their team. Internal team as well as clients. Somebody else is saying have increased the pace of communication and enablement with my global team, went from 1x a month for enrichment to enablement to one time a week. And so we have another comment here, and again, I'm going to see if let's pause and see if anybody can put unmute. If there's anyone who would like to speak up, if you can unmute yourself, that would be great. And go ahead and jump in with your questions or comments, as Jim has requested. Okay, again, as we wait for that, it seems that it may not happen. It seems like we're unable to unmute Jim.
Okay.
So sorry about
Well,
that.
keep sending us some comments. Let me react, Amir, to the one about communication. That's definitely a theme I'm hearing massively in these discussions. Frequency, of course, but also how we communicate. You know, taking time to ask about the person, the situation they're in. You know, I talked about Jennifer Say at Levi's a moment ago, and I was just speaking with her the other day, and she said, you know, she's very concerned about, they're still working remotely, very concerned about those people who are living alone and the loneliness issue. So she's just trying to be more deliberate, as one of the participants said, frequent communication about the whole person, not just about the priorities in the business. And I think those of you on the webinar who come out of a commercial function, you know, we're kind of trained at P&G to be good communicators in all functions. You know, we're the one-page memo, the focus on writing, and I think those skills right now need to be amplified. I know a couple top marketing people at some companies who have become the company spokesperson, frankly, because they tend to be pretty good at it. They're in touch with customers, they're in touch with what's going on in society, and they're speaking a lot more to the company at large about you know, what's going on, how they're trying to make a bigger difference with people, and how everyone can help. So communication for sure. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and then we've got a lot of really great comments coming in along the lines of how this is a great framework, great overview, Jim. And somebody said, I would also add people, profit, and planet to your framework.
Yeah.
Planet is perhaps the missing part, but it is needed. But it's a great framework nonetheless. Yeah. So if you have any questions now for our audience, if you have any questions for Jim, please go ahead and put that also in the questions so we can go ahead and have Jim ask him to answer as many of these questions as we possibly can. Then meanwhile, I will read a couple of these other comments. And someone said, I work with several nonprofits, and your recap of the changes in who, why, what, and how ring very true. Thanks for articulating it so well. Really great tips. We live in a VUCA world. Of course, that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And to fight this, we can also use a VUCA, vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So this situation is giving me a huge opportunity to increase my understanding. So really great comments. Any questions for Jim at this point? Let's see if we got any questions coming in. So Jim, one question I will ask you is, you know, what you're describing, this has actually been a very encouraging conversation for me, because nowadays one can't help but to kind of get this perception that there is just a lot of division and not enough unity. But it seems like a lot of these recognitions that folks are having are really moving in the direction of the sort of honoring the human, you know, ourselves and each other and the underrepresented. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I would absolutely, and I would say that, you know, the ANA, which is an acronym for the Association of National Advertisers, it's the largest trade association in marketing and branding in the world. It's U.S. based. Most of the big advertisers and brands are members. P&G certainly is a major member. Mark Pritchard's highly involved in the organization. They have taken on a mandate going forward to shape the industry in a better way. And one of their pillars is a tremendous focus on the human side of brands and business, and a tremendous focus on society and equality.
Yeah.
So when you see those kinds of people from those kinds of companies with the money and resources behind them, that's going to have a significant impact on how we think about brands and brand frameworks and activation and purpose. So, and I think those are all very positive things. Of course, there's a lot of darkness in our times, a lot of sickness, a lot of issues with suffering. But I think out of this, I think is coming I don't know, a focus on the things that I think are most important. So
Yeah.
I am in that sense hopeful.
Very good. Thank you so much. We have a question here. It says this pandemic has disproportionately affected women who need to care for kids while still doing our jobs. Any advice for how we as women can find synergy in doing both jobs?
Wow, no, well, absolutely. Thanks for bringing it up, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I think we have to. This is part of the discussion as leaders, whether you're a man, a woman, a mother, father, living alone, whatever. We have to take the time to understand everyone's situation and what can we do to help. And women have I'll use a horrible generalization, but they typically are a bit better at helping each other out, a bit more supportive. And men need to learn from that as well. But I think we just have more than ever need to understand the situations of the people who we're working with, and to care about it, and to see what we can do to help. And so thanks for raising that. It's a very, very powerful point. And I think, again, maybe this is another one of the rays of sunshine that come out of this.
Yeah. Jim, one other question says that basically, first of all, lots of really great comments in terms of how appreciative folks are for this framework. Someone said, look, it's hard to focus on 6 things, although these are very valid. What is the single-minded sort of line you hear from leaders in terms of focus, or the biggest mistakes that they've made, or what they need to focus on?
I think the biggest one is to listen to your people and to communicate. That's if you're listening, if you're in touch and you're communicating frequently about what's on your mind, what you're hearing, and what you can do. So I'd say listen, care, and communicate.
Yes, absolutely. So we got another question. This is probably our final one. As wealth inequality grows, how are large companies looking to address it through product, services, and government policy?
Well, I think it's a great question. It is it's maybe one of the macro issues of our time, along with the environment. I think what's happening is companies like the ANA I just spoke about, companies are all trying to address pay inequality. That has been a lot of focus on gender equality and pay, but also just in are our companies addressing racism, implicit racism, systemic racism? Are we a kind of place that all people can work to their potential? And this has always been important to organizations that are outstanding, but even the ones that have been pretty good at this in the past are raising their game and making commitments and acting versus talking. So think of that happening at thousands of companies around the world, taking action themselves. And that's where I think change is going to happen. And I think change is going to happen from business first. It's, governments have to come a long way. They have lots of complications. We don't need to get into that. But I'm seeing businesses taking a level of commitment and conviction toward equality that I have not seen before. And again, and they're acting on it. They're making public commitments. They're changing things. And you just listen to my podcast if you choose. You'll hear it from every leader I talk to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. And speaking of your podcast, somebody said, where can we listen to your podcast? So if you could just mention that briefly for those who may not be familiar with how to find your podcast.
It should be available wherever you normally listen to podcasts. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Stitcher, it's on almost every major platform. But if you just Googled this, it's called the CMO Podcast. It should pop up, and whatever platform you like to listen to, it should be available on it. Most, more than half of my downloads are through Apple, but it's on other platforms as well. And by the way, it's on the personal front, it's been a really fun project. I think everyone needs to have a passion project where they're learning, opening their mind, and to be able to sit down once a week, sometimes twice a week, with a leader around the world and ask them about their life and their priorities and their lessons and their history. It's tremendously inspiring. It's a wonderful thing to do, and it's been one of the things that's kept me, sort of happy, productive, learning during this pandemic. So I think everyone needs, on the business and the personal side, a hobby, and the CMO Podcast is a lovely hobby.
Yes, absolutely. As a podcaster myself, I can tell you, I look forward to those interviews. You get to learn from folks and exchange ideas, and at the same time share those ideas with others. And speaking of which, you have shared a lot of really great ideas with us today. Jim, thank you so much for your time and this wisdom that you've shared with us. I'm going to go ahead and make a few announcements, and then we're going to wrap up. So thank you again, Jim.
Amir, thank you, and thank everyone. And I wish you all the best for the year ahead. It's good to be with you. Thanks, Amir, for the opportunity.
Sure, my pleasure. And again, this is Amir Ganad, your host. Thanks again for your participation, and I wish you the very best and look forward to having you on our future calls. Thanks, everybody.